6 months ago, at my daughter-in-law's baby shower, in front of 32 women holding cucumber sandwiches and pastel gift bags, she leaned over to her sister and said 4 words she thought I couldn't hear. "She's basically dead weight." She was talking about me. What she didn't know, what she still doesn't fully know, even now, is that the house she was standing in, the house she'd spent $11,000 decorating for that party, the house she planned to raise my grandchild in, that house had my name on the deed. Not hers, not my son's. Mine.
And by the time that baby shower ended, she understood exactly how much weight I was capable of throwing around. My name is Margaret. I'm 68 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that if you gave people enough love, enough patience, enough quiet sacrifice, eventually they'd see you. They'd understand what you'd given up for them. I believed that for a very long time. This is the story of the day I stopped waiting for my daughter-in-law to see me and made absolutely certain she couldn't ignore me anymore.
If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, like the person everyone benefits from but nobody actually values, stay with me until the end, because what happened in that living room still gives me chills when I think about it. And if stories like this one matter to you, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not the baby shower. 4 years earlier, when my son Nathan first told me he was getting married.
I liked Brianna in the beginning. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about hating someone from the first handshake. She was sharp, ambitious, worked in real estate marketing, always had somewhere to be, always had an opinion about how things should look and function. Nathan lit up around her in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy bringing home science fair ribbons, breathless and proud, wanting me to notice. I told myself, this is good. This is what I wanted for him. A woman with drive. A woman who'd push him to be more than he thought he could be.
My husband Walter passed 11 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. Gone before the ambulance even turned onto our street. I remember standing in the kitchen that morning, the coffee still warm in the pot, wondering how a whole life could end between one sentence and the next. Nathan was 24 then, barely out of college, and in the years after, it was just the two of us. I went back to work. I'd been a claims adjuster for 22 years before that, and I picked the job back up at 57 because the house needed a mortgage paid, and grief needed somewhere to go.
Besides staring at the walls Walter had painted with his own hands.
I mention Walter because the house matters here, and the house was his idea before it was ever mine. We bought that property in 1994, a modest 4-bedroom on a cul-de-sac, back when Nathan was still small enough to ride on his father's shoulders through the empty rooms, before we'd even signed the papers. And we paid it off together over 18 years, dollar by dollar, careful budget by careful budget, before he died. It was never just a building to me. It was the last big thing Walter and I built together, and every room in it still holds some piece of him. The hallway, he
Painted 3 different shades of blue before settling on the right one. The hardwood floors he refinished by hand. The maple tree he planted in the backyard the week Nathan was born.
When Nathan and Brianna got married 3 years ago, they were renting a cramped 1-bedroom apartment 40 minutes from both our jobs. Brianna hated it. She'd mention it constantly, at every dinner, every holiday, the way some people mention the weather, except with a specific edge to it, like the apartment itself was a personal insult. The walls are paper thin. The parking is a nightmare. I can't imagine raising a family in a place like this. I remember sitting across from her at a dinner once, listening to her list the apartment's flaws for the 3rd time that month, and thinking,
not unkindly at the time, that she simply wanted more than she currently had. I understood that. I'd wanted more once too. I offered them the house.
I want to be clear about what I mean by that, because it matters enormously to everything that happened after. I didn't give them the house. I offered to let them live in it, rent-free. I moved myself into the smaller guest cottage behind the property, technically still on the same lot, just across the garden, a space Walter and I had built years earlier for his mother when she was still alive, back when 3 generations under one roof still felt like something families simply did without needing to discuss it. It has its own kitchen, its own bathroom, its own door. It's small, but it's
Mine. And it's quiet. And from the kitchen window I can see that same maple tree, taller now than I ever expected it to grow.
I did this because I thought it made sense. Nathan and Brianna got to live in a beautiful 4-bedroom house instead of a cramped apartment. I got to be close to my son, close enough to hear his car pull into the driveway some evenings, close enough that grief didn't feel quite so much like an empty house anymore. And I kept my name on the deed because, and I say this without an ounce of apology, I am not a woman who gives away the last thing her husband built with his own 2 hands, not even to family, not without a plan, not without protecting myself first. 22 years of processing. Insurance claims teaches you exactly how quickly a family's assumptions about "it'll always work out" can collapse the moment a marriage does, or a mortgage does, or a person simply changes their mind about who they married. Nathan knew this arrangement in full. We'd sat down with my attorney, a woman named Carol Whitfield, who has represented my family's affairs for 15 years, steady and precise in a way I'd always found comforting. And we'd drawn up a simple, clear document. They could live in the house indefinitely, rent-free, as long as they wanted. But ownership stayed with me. If anything ever happened between them, a divorce, a falling out, anything at all, the house was never in dispute. It was mine. Brianna, as far as I understood at the time, knew none of this. I asked Nathan about it once, early on, sitting at his kitchen table, with a cup of tea going cold between my hands. Does she know the house is still in my name? He shifted in his seat, the way he used to when he was 12 and had broken something, and was deciding whether confessing was worth the trouble. It hasn't really come up, he said. I don't want her to feel like we're just guests in our own home, Mom. It's better if she just thinks of it as ours. I let it go. I shouldn't have, looking back, but I let it go because I loved my son and I wanted him happy, and at the time it felt like a small, harmless omission, a kindness even, the kind of white lie that smooths a marriage's early edges. I told myself that. Over the next 3 years, that small omission grew roots I never anticipated.
Brianna began referring to the house in conversations with her friends, her co-workers, even at family gatherings, as our place. Small phrase, but I noticed it every time, the way you notice a splinter you can't quite dig out. She repainted rooms without asking. She had a contractor rip out and redo the kitchen backsplash, a kitchen I had personally chosen the tile for with Walter back in 2006, standing in a tile showroom for 2 hours arguing lovingly over shades of sage green, without so much as a text message to me first. I found out when I stopped by one afternoon.
With groceries, and found strangers in hard hats standing where my kitchen used to be. When I gently mentioned that the house held a lot of memories for me, she smiled the particular smile she reserved for moments like that, polite, a little pitying, the smile you give someone you've already decided is stuck in the past, and said, "Well, Margaret, it's a new chapter now. You have to let old things go eventually." I started noticing something else, too. The way she talked about me, when she thought I wasn't listening, or didn't think it mattered if I was. At Nathan's birthday dinner 2 years ago, I heard her tell his coworker, quite casually, refilling a wine glass without even lowering her voice much, "Oh, his mom lives in the little cottage out back. It works out. She doesn't really need much space at her age." At Thanksgiving last year, discussing seating arrangements with her own mother in the next room, she said loud enough for me to hear clearly from where I stood folding napkins, "We'll just put Margaret at the end. She doesn't really talk much anyway."
I want to pause here and say something important. I am not a fragile woman. I raised a son alone through the worst year of my life. I processed insurance claims for people who had lost everything in fires and floods for over 2 decades, sat across kitchen tables from families sorting through the wreckage of their lives, and I learned a long time ago how to sit with discomfort without falling apart. I didn't confront Brianna over any of these moments, not because I was weak, but because I kept telling myself the story I wanted to be true, that she just had a sharp tongue, that she loved my
Son, that eventually, when she understood what our family had actually built for her, she'd soften. I was wrong. And I found out exactly how wrong 3 weeks before the baby shower, in a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear.
I'd come to the main house to drop off a casserole dish. Old habits. The kind Carol, my attorney, once teased me about, said I fed people the way other women hugged them, and the back door was propped open for the warm evening air. I could hear Brianna in the kitchen, on the phone with her sister, planning the baby shower details, laughter and paper rustling in the background. And then, without any warning at all, the conversation turned to me.
"Honestly, I don't even know why we have to invite her," Brianna was saying, her voice easy, almost bored, the way people talk about mildly annoying errands. She just sits in the corner and makes everyone uncomfortable. It's not like she contributes anything. Nathan says we have to, obligation or whatever, but I swear, she's basically dead weight at this point. I don't know how much longer Nathan's going to want to carry that around. Like I was luggage. Like I was an inconvenience my son was reluctantly hauling through life, out of obligation rather than love. I stood on that back step for almost a full minute before I knocked on the open door, casserole dish still in my hands, my heart doing something I hadn't felt since the night the police called about Walter. Brianna spun around, phone still pressed to her ear, and for just a second, just 1 second, I saw something flicker across her face. Not embarrassment, calculation. She was doing the math on how much I'd heard. "Oh, Margaret, I didn't hear you come in," she said far too brightly, ending the call abruptly. "I brought a casserole," I said. "I'll just leave it on the counter."
I left. I didn't say another word, but I want you to understand what happened in my mind on the walk back across that garden to my little cottage, past the maple tree Walter planted, because it changes everything about what came next.
I wasn't angry, not in the way you might expect. I was clear, clearer than I'd been in 3 years. I sat at my kitchen table that night without turning on the lights, watching the main house glow warm and yellow through the trees, full of a life I had made possible and apparently wasn't considered part of. And I made a decision, standing at my own sink an hour later, looking out at that house I had spent 18 years paying off, with a man who was no longer alive to see how his own daughter-in-law spoke about his widow behind closed doors. I called Carol Whitfield the next morning.
I told her everything. The backsplash, the seating arrangement comment, the phone call I'd overheard, and I asked her a simple question. Given everything in our original agreement, what were my options if I wanted to formalize things a little differently going forward? Not evict anyone, not punish my son. I want to be very clear about that.
because I never once, in any of this, wanted to hurt Nathan. But I wanted the truth of that house. Whose name was on it? Whose money had built it? Whose sacrifice had made it possible for two young people to raise a child rent-free in a beautiful home?
Carol drew up a simple document. Not an eviction, not a threat. A formal, dated residency and ownership agreement, restating in plain legal language exactly what had always been true. That I, Margaret Ellen Hartley, held sole ownership of the property. That Nathan and Brianna resided there under a revocable, rent-free arrangement, contingent on the relationship remaining respectful and cooperative, and that I retained full right to review, modify, or terminate that arrangement at my discretion, with 90 days' notice.
It wasn't a weapon. I want to say that clearly. It was a mirror. I simply wanted, finally, for the truth to be visible to the one person who'd spent 3 years pretending it didn't exist.
The baby shower was held 2 weeks later in the living room of that house, a room with hardwood floors Walter had refinished himself the summer before he died, kneeling on his hands and knees for 3 straight weekends because he refused to pay someone else to do it. A memory I carried with me the entire time I sat in that room watching strangers admire Brianna's beautiful floors. 32 women arrived in pastel dresses. There were tissue paper pom-poms in blush pink, a dessert table with a 3-tiered cake reading "Welcome Baby Hartley," a photo booth with props shaped like tiny
Onesies and a seating chart with engraved place cards that Brianna had ordered from a specialty stationer 3 states away, because apparently the local shop's card stock wasn't quite right. My place card was at the small side table near the kitchen, tucked slightly out of the main circle of chairs, angled just enough that I'd have to twist around to see the gift opening. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I'd learned, over 3 years, exactly which battles to let go of, saving myself for the ones that actually mattered.
I brought a gift, a hand-knitted blanket, the same pattern I'd made for Nathan when he was born. The yarn a soft, faded blue I'd special ordered to match a swatch I'd kept in a drawer for 28 years. I also brought a manila envelope tucked inside my handbag, which I had absolutely no intention of bringing out unless I needed to. I did need to. About an hour into the party, during a lull between gift opening and cake, I overheard Brianna at the dessert table, talking to her sister again, the same sister from the phone call, gesturing faintly in my direction while pretending to fuss with the cake knife, straightening a ribbon that didn't need straightening.
"I don't know why Nathan insists on inviting her to everything," she said. Her voice dipped low, but not nearly low enough, not with the acoustics of that room Walter had built, with such careful attention to every angle. "She's basically dead weight at every single event. I keep telling him, eventually people are going to start asking why she's even here."
This time, she wasn't whispering into a phone in an empty kitchen. This time, 3 other women near the dessert table heard it too. I watched their faces change, the particular kind of uncomfortable stillness that happens when strangers witness cruelty they weren't prepared for, the sudden interest in their own paper plates. I stood up. I want you to understand, my hands weren't shaking. I felt, for the first time in 3 years, completely steady, the way you feel right before stepping off a diving board you've circled for a very long time.
"Brianna," I said, and the room quieted the way rooms do when something shifts, conversations trailing off mid-sentence, heads turning. "Since we're on the subject of what I contribute, I think it's time everyone understood something about this house." She turned, the cake knife still in her hand, her expression flickering between confusion and the beginning of alarm.
"This house," I continued, my voice steady, carrying easily across that room Walter had built with such care for exactly this kind of acoustics. The one we're standing in right now, the one you decorated so beautifully for today, is not in your name. It's not in Nathan's name either. It never has been. My husband Walter and I paid this house off, dollar by dollar, over 18 years, long before either of you knew each other. When Nathan got married, I offered to let you both live here rent-free, as a gift, out of love for my son. I moved myself into the cottage out back, so you could have
the space to build your family. But the deed has always had one name on it: mine. The room had gone completely silent. 32 women frozen mid-motion. A fork paused halfway to someone's mouth. Somewhere near the window, I saw Nathan appear in the doorway from the kitchen, his face pale, clearly having caught the last 30 seconds of what I'd said.
I opened my handbag and pulled out the manila envelope. I didn't hand it to Brianna dramatically. I simply set it down on the gift table, next to the pile of pastel-wrapped presents, and slid it toward her, the paper making a small, deliberate sound against the tablecloth.
"That's a copy of the deed," I said, "and a formal agreement my attorney drew up 2 weeks ago, after I overheard you on the phone describing me as dead weight that Nathan is, quote, carrying around. It restates the arrangement we've always had, in writing, with one addition, a 90-day review clause, should the relationship in this house continue in the direction it's been going."
"Margaret, this is not the time," Brianna started, her voice cracking somewhere between fury and panic, her eyes darting toward the guests around her, calculating, the same calculation I'd seen flicker across her face 3 weeks earlier on that back step. "You're right," I said. "It wasn't the time 3 weeks ago either, when I stood on your back step listening to you call me luggage, but you didn't seem concerned about timing then." Nathan crossed the room now, and I watched my son's face as he picked up that envelope and actually read it, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes moving faster and faster down the page. I want to be honest with you. This was the part that hurt the most, more than anything Brianna had said. Watching my son's face as he processed, in real time, in front of 32 guests, that his wife had spent years quietly erasing his mother's sacrifice, and that he had let it happen by staying silent, by choosing the comfortable omission over the harder truth. "Is this true?" he asked Brianna, quietly, the room still holding its breath around them. "Did you say that? About Mom being dead weight?" Brianna's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "Nathan, I was just venting. It doesn't mean—" "Multiple times," I said, gently, because I wasn't there to humiliate my son, only to finally be seen. At your birthday 2 years ago, at Thanksgiving last year, on the phone 3 weeks ago, I let it go every single time, because I loved you both, and I didn't want to make things difficult. But I'm 68 years old, and I've decided I don't have the years left to spend being quietly erased in my own family's house. I want to tell you what happened over the following weeks, because I know some of you are hoping for a clean, satisfying ending, and I owe you the honest version instead.
The baby shower ended early. Guests left in that particular hush that follows a scene nobody expected to witness, murmuring polite goodbyes, avoiding eye contact with Brianna on their way out. One older woman, a coworker of Brianna's, I later learned, squeezing my hand gently on her way past and saying only, "Good for you," before disappearing out the front door. For about 10 days after, Nathan barely spoke to either of us, caught, I think, in the impossible middle ground of loving his wife and finally truly understanding what she'd been doing to his mother in private for years.
Called me exactly twice in those 10 days, both times short, both times ending with him saying he needed more time to think. Brianna didn't call to apologize, not at first. What she did do, 2 weeks later, was ask Nathan to set up a meeting, the 3 of us,
at my attorney's office to discuss the agreement. I went in expecting an argument, rehearsing in the car exactly what I'd say if she tried to justify herself again. What I got instead was quieter than I expected. Brianna sat across the table from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale, and said the thing I don't think she'd ever said to another human being in her adult life.
"I was cruel to you," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I told myself it was just talk, that it didn't really mean anything. But I said things about you that I would never want said about me. I think I resented feeling like a guest in a house I was raising my child in, and instead of talking to you about that honestly, I made you smaller so I could feel bigger. That's not an excuse. I just want you to know I understand what I did."
I didn't forgive her immediately, and I want to be honest about that too, because I think pretending otherwise would do a disservice to anyone watching this who's been in a similar position. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single conversation, however honest. What I did instead was keep the agreement exactly as written. The 90-day review clause stayed in place, and I told her plainly that it would remain there for the foreseeable future, not as a punishment, but as an honest acknowledgement of where we actually stood, a fact I'd earned the right to state plainly after 3 years of not saying.
"That's fair," she said. "Just that. No argument. And somehow that surprised me more than the apology itself." My granddaughter was born 6 weeks later. Brianna named her Eleanor, after Walter's mother, the same woman the cottage behind the house was originally built for, a detail I don't think Brianna even fully understood the weight of when she chose it. Or maybe she understood it exactly. I don't know if that was an apology or a coincidence or something in between, and I've decided I don't need to know which. I hold that baby most Sunday afternoons now, in the cottage, under the maple tree Walter planted the year Nathan was born. And slowly, carefully, something between Brianna and me is being rebuilt. Not quickly, not completely, but honestly this time, brick by brick, the way the good things always seem to get built.
Nathan and I had our own conversation, separate from that meeting, a few days after the baby shower, sitting on the back steps of the cottage where he'd played as a boy. He apologized for staying silent for 3 years, for letting a small omission about a deed grow into something that let his wife believe she could speak about his mother that way. He cried, actually, which I hadn't seen him do since his father's funeral, and told me he was ashamed of how easy it had been to just not correct her, month after month, because correcting her meant conflict, and he'd always hated conflict more.
Then he loved the truth. I told him what I'd tell any of you watching this who might be facing something similar. Love isn't proven by what you give away. It's proven by what you're finally willing to say out loud, even when the room goes quiet, even when it costs you something to say it. I still live in that cottage. I could move into the main house tomorrow if I wanted to. Legally, it's entirely within my rights. Carol reminds me of that every time we review the paperwork. But I don't want to. That cottage has become mine in a way the big house never quite was, not since Walter died. What I wanted wasn't the house back. I wanted the truth back. I wanted, after 3 years of being quietly diminished in very place my husband and I built with our own hands, to stand in that living room and be seen, fully, by everyone in the room, for exactly what I actually was. Not dead weight, the reason that house existed at all. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever given everything to a family that treated your sacrifice as invisible, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you want to know what happened at Eleanor's first birthday party, And whether Brianna kept her word through that whole first difficult year, that's a story too. Let me know, and I'll consider telling it. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.